Hello, welcome to One-on-One with me, Amon Muliwa. Thank you so much for sticking here. Thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much for viewing the videos. Thank you so much for liking them. Thank you so much for the comments. We've come a long way and time flies. Who remembers when we first came with the introduction of what we'll be doing? We came in with what is in the package. We came in with our menu. We came in with how to start an interaction or manage an interaction, the do's and the don'ts. And last week we shared about our sexual reproductive bodies. And if you remember, today we're supposed to be looking at something to do with key definitions in sexual and reproductive health and rights. But realize that for someone to be able to understand and pick this, they needed to understand basically what their bodies look like. So welcome back. My name is Amon Muliwa on One-on-One with Amon Muliwa right here, your online education channel. Today we're talking about sexual and reproductive health and rights, and to the students, the NGO workers, to the people in the corporate world, we're saying that by the end of this interaction, the participants or you people who are viewing, the people who are downloading the videos should be in position to articulate key terms under sexual reproductive health and rights. So when we talk about key terms under sexual and reproductive health and rights, let me just remind you of what we talked about last week. Last week we looked at our sexual reproductive bodies, the anatomical structure of our sexual reproductive body. We looked at the male reproductive organ called the penis, and right there on your screen you're seeing it. We looked at the external view, we looked at the internal view. What I remember vividly, we looked at the external view, we talked about parts like the glands, which is very sensitive, and we said that if you're not circumcised, the sheath, or what we are calling the frenulum, whenever it's not removed, it puts you at risk of HIV, because where it covers the head or the glands is prone to what we call, it has target cells which are prone to HIV. We talked about the shaft, and the shaft, that is the part between the head and down here, the shaft. We talked about that that's the part that becomes hard during sexual intercourse or sexcitation. We talked about the scrotum, and all these ones people should be able to remember. We also went ahead and talked about the female anatomical structure, the female external genitalia, parts like the clitoris, the mons pubis, the labia majora, labia minora. We talked about the opening of the vagina, opening of the urethra. I remember saying one thing I cannot forget, that in as much as the men have one outlet for the urine and ejaculation, the women actually urinate from the opening of the urethra, and then they do the sex and menstruation from the opening of the vagina. Interesting here. So after we've talked about that, we'll get into definitions, and some of the definitions that we need to know about if you talk about sexual and reproductive health. Remember, we're going to break it down. Sexual, what is sex? Now, the sex we are talking about here is not sex intercourse, but we're talking about the biological characteristics that define humans as female or male. And we are saying that while these sets of biological characteristics are not mutually exclusive, as they are individuals who possess both, they tend to differentiate humans as males or female. So we are saying that they are not mutually exclusive, because you'll find that there are people actually who are born with both. I have a male organ, I have a female organ. So we're saying that, however, in general use and in many languages, the term sex is often used to mean sexual activity, as I earlier said, or sexual intercourse, but the above definition would be made use of here when we are trying to talk about sexual and reproductive health and rights. Sex basically are the biological definitions that define one as a female and one as a male. So another thing that you'll come across is the word sexuality. Sexuality actually is a central aspect of being human throughout life, and it encompasses a number of things. The other day in Uganda there was a debate of sexuality education framework, and we're going to teach people sex. Actually, sex is a simple component. I think one of the many components of sexuality. Sexuality is about sex, it's about one's gender, one's gender identities, the roles, the sexual orientation, eroticism, pleasure, intimacy, and reproduction. So you find that basically sexuality is about you. You wake up every morning and you decide, I'm going to put on this jumper. I'm putting on this. I decided to put on this because I wanted to look different. That is sexuality. It's not about sex. So sexuality is about your whole body. Everything that you do, everything that you think about is about sexuality. And we're saying that this is experienced and expressed in what people think, our fantasies, our desires, our beliefs, our attitudes, our values, our behaviors, the practices, the roles, the relationship. Who has heard about sex there? So that's why we're saying that sexuality is a lot more than simply sex. A lot more than simply sex. And that's what we are saying, that sexuality is basically us. What we think, what we do, our aspirations, our beliefs. It is all that. And we're saying further that while sexuality can include all these dimensions, however, not all of them are always expressed or experienced. So it can include all this, but people may not express or experience this. And it is influenced by the interaction of biological, psychological, social, economic, political, cultural, ethical, legal, historical, religious, and spiritual factors. Remember, what is sexuality? I just want to tell you, it is who we are, what we do, what we think, our aspirations, our experiences, our values. Sexuality. So people should stop talking about, in Uganda especially, that when you teach people about sexuality education, we are teaching them about sex. No, we're actually teaching them about their lives, aspirations, experiences. Now, a big word, health. What is health? Simply, a state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. This is what we're looking about as health. So someone should not say, because I don't have anything that is affecting my health, I think I'm healthy. I'm not sick, I'm healthy. You might actually not be sick, but you don't have money. You're not healthy. You're actually not sick, but you're not mentally okay. You're actually not healthy. So health is basically the whole well-being of a person. The whole well-being of a person. Everything about you, socially, economically, financially, sexually. Not simply that you are not sick. Interesting. So now, remember, breaking this thing down reminds me when I was still young and would go to the bush to chop firewood. Our huge firewood was to define sexual reproductive health and rights. We've talked about sex, we've talked about sexuality, we've talked about health, general well-being of someone. Now, look at this. What is sexual health? A state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being. Remember, that's what we say health is. Now I want to bring in the sexual bit. You get me? So we are getting the definition of health, a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to one's sexuality. It is not merely the absence of disease or dysfunction or infirmity. So sexual health is actually about our sexual body. Is it actually physically, emotionally, is it okay? It doesn't matter whether your sexual body is not sick. We're looking at the whole picture, the sexual body that we looked about last week. So we're saying that a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality, it is not merely the absence of disease, dysfunction, or infirmity. Now, we're saying further that for sexual health to be attained and maintained, the sexual rights of persons must be respected and protected and fulfilled. Now listen to this. Because we started with, remember, we're looking at key definitions under this word sexual, reproductive, health, and rights. We talked about sex, we talked about sexuality, we talked about health, we talked about sexual health. Now, it is bringing us to something called rights. Okay. So what are sexual rights? These are basically must-haves in relation to someone's sexual life. what are those must-haves in relation to your sexual life? What are those must-haves in relation to your sexual life? Things like, a person has a right to seek, receive, and impart information related to sexuality. It is your right to be told. That is the reason in Uganda we're talking about these young people have a right to get this information about their lives. A right to sexuality education. A right to respect for bodily integrity. One of the organizations in Uganda was running a campaign where they're talking about trying to protect young girls and women. For example, young girls and women in public are abused, insults are hurled at them, they touch their bums, they touch their breasts, they touch their bodies, what we call bad touches. So this organization was actually reaching out and said, hey, they're basically trying to help these young girls to ensure that these young girls enjoy their rights unabated. We also have a right to choose their partner and consent in marriage. And these were issues of like forced marriage. I know during COVID-19, a number of things have happened. In my area where I come from in Eastern Uganda, young girls have been married off because their parents want to get money in the COVID-19 lockdown. But we are saying one of the rights, the must-haves of these young girls is that they have a right to choose their partner. And this of course brings in issues of male or female partner. We shall be getting there, don't get worried. They have a right to decide to be sexually active or not. A right to consent in a sexual relationship. A right to decide whether or not and when to have children. And this is what brings in issues of family planning and contraception. I remember in one of the villages I've worked in Eastern Uganda, a woman went and got an implant. And when she went back, the husband asked them, who gave you permission? The husband actually got a razor blade and he tried to look for the implant and he cut the woman to remove it. He failed because he didn't have the technical know-how. He had to bring the woman back the next day and we removed the implant. But the issue is that this woman actually has a right to decide. So if the woman has not decided to have, even if they are your wife, they have a life and it is their life. It is their right. Okay, so they also have a right to pursue a satisfying, safe and pleasurable sex life. People have to enjoy their sex. They should not simply have sex because they're having it. They should enjoy it and it is their right. So you're saying that the responsible exercise of human rights requires that all persons respect the rights of others. So in as much as you have this right, you should also respect the right of others. Thank you so much, and you're still on One-on-One with Amon Myowa, your online educative channel, and we come your way once every week. Key terms under sexual, reproductive health, and rights. We talked about sex. We've talked about sexuality. We've talked about sexual health. Now we went into sexual rights. Now, excuse me, we are talking about reproductive health. Listen to those two words. When I'm teaching my students and my participants, I tell them, let's separate them. Reproductive from the word reproduce, which means you're trying to use something and getting another thing out of it. And then health. We say health is actually general being of someone, not simply the absence of disease. So what is reproductive health? It is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, isn't it? Relating to the reproductive processes. Remember last week we talked about the reproductive body. You know the reason why we had to look at that first? Is because if you had looked at this first, you'll be asking, what is the reproductive body? But now we can easily connect to last week's reproductive body and the sessions and this. So, a state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity relating to reproductive processes, system, and its functions. And we're saying that this implies that people are able to have a satisfying, safe sex life, and that they have the capacity and capability to reproduce, and the freedom to decide if, when, and how often to do so. This is interesting. Sexual reproductive health and rights. Now, what are reproductive health rights? So you're saying that these are basically one's rights in line with the reproductive body. You can look for a definition somewhere, but that's how simply I can put it. one's rights, one's must-haves in relation to their reproductive body. For example, the right to be informed and to have access to safe, effective, affordable, acceptable methods of their choice for regulation of fertility, which are not against the law. It is their right. It is your right. The right of access to appropriate health care services that will enable someone like a woman to go safely through pregnancy and childbirth and provide couples with the best chance of having a healthy infant. Sexual reproductive health and rights. For example, let's give a few justifications. We're talking about rights, but is this something that is justifiable? For example, sexual and reproductive health of young people. These have been re-echoed and guaranteed by regional instruments like the International Convention of Rights of the Child of 1989, which re-echoed the right to decision-making, the right to education, the right to health care. The other one was the International Conference on Population and Development of 1994. If you want to know something about sexual and reproductive health and rights, this is a convention you need to read and should be on top of your fingers. So in Cairo, commonly referred to as the ICPD, for example, the ICPD +5, +10, +15, 1999, 2004, 2009, it echoed the right of these people as sexual beings and to have them participate in issues that affect their sexual and reproductive health. The UN Women's Conference of Beijing, 1995, Beijing +5, Beijing +10, Beijing +15, 2000, 2005, 2010, it talked about and re-echoed gender equity and protection against sexual abuse. So the things we're talking about here as rights is not our own making. These are must-haves. These instruments are simply coming in to ensure that people actually enjoy their rights. These are people we call duty bearers, people, organizations who have the role of ensuring that you and I, and my children and my wife, and my neighbors and every other person that I interact with and I've not interacted with can enjoy their rights. What are some of these rights? Sexual and reproductive health and rights. Just one more time. The right to health. The right to live. No one has a right to take away your life. The right to education and information. I talked about them earlier. The right to privacy. You see, that is the reason when you go to most of our health facilities and a woman is giving birth here, another one there, this is a violation of someone's right to privacy. A right to decide the number and spacing of children. A woman has the right to do that. They don't have to get consent from their husband. I mean, they have their own body. Okay? A right to be born free of discrimination. No one should discriminate against you in the line of race, color, height, things like that. People have a right to be free from practices that harm women and girls. Practices like female genital mutilation in eastern Uganda. They have the right to be free from violence. I mean, who loves violence? Even the people who use violence actually hate violence. As we wind up on this, look at that. You realize that sexual and reproductive health and rights is at the intersection of a number of things. That for someone to enjoy their sexual and reproductive health and rights, their sexual health must be guaranteed. Their reproductive health must be guaranteed. Their reproductive rights must be guaranteed. And their sexual rights must be guaranteed. Ladies and gentlemen, I love you so much. This has been One-on-One with me, Amy Muliowa. Today we've been looking at key definitions under these topics we call sexual, reproductive health and rights. We are now going to go deep under sexual and reproductive health and rights. We'll be talking about sexually transmitted infections. We'll be talking about cancer of the cervix. We'll be talking about HIV and AIDS, issues that have come up now, issues like HIV combination prevention. Have you heard of that? I love you so much and see you next week. Woo!